Hey, good morning, everyone. It's John here. Sorry, just checking the volume. Trying to get this camera in a place that the sun's coming right through the window and it's glaring off of my big shiny forehead. So I apologize for that, but I'll try to sit back a little bit. I hope all of you are doing well. It's hard to believe that we're uh, um, getting into week 6 now, amidst this sort of unique, crazy course that we've been going through together. So I wanted to just discuss briefly, um, introduce you a little bit into clinical trials. I want to discuss ethics. As the next couple of weeks, we're going to be heading into that ethics portion that we discussed at the very beginning of the class. And then at the very last part of the class with that final assignment, it'll be the culmination of both the legal issues section that we've already gone through, as well as the ethical section that we're about to go through. So wanted to briefly touch upon that. So first, before we get there, one thing that I wanted to, as I've been going through that first week 3 milestone, a thought that I had that I wanted to cover with everyone is with regard to the legal component section of that assignment. And I just want to make sure that as you work on that final draft, that it's clear that that's the section where you should be discussing the legal issues applicable in the case. So clearly, the most obvious legal issue in the case is with respect to medical malpractice or medical negligence as it pertains to Dr. Ricketson. And this is where you're going to go through those 4 elements. And it's really important to go through those 4 elements of negligence that we've been going through during the last over the last several weeks. And the reason is, there's a difference between regular layman's terms negligence and actual legal negligence. And for example, if I fail to feed the dog, that's negligent on my part. That's something I didn't intentionally do. I just failed to do it. I forgot to do it. That's negligent. That is totally different. Just because Dr. Ricketson forgot to do something or failed to comply with a policy, that by itself is merely a fact that may contribute to legal negligence. It does not, in and of itself, establish legal negligence. So it's not the same thing. And I think that's the hardest thing to sort of make. Is sort of very difficult to make that distinction for someone who's not, like I said at the very beginning of this class, mired in these legal issues every single day. So as I went to law school and had to think about all these words in terms of their elements, it's something that it takes training, it takes experience, it takes going through that day in and day out. And so what I'm asking you to do is sort of make that distinction. Negligence, just failing to do something or not doing something, does not establish negligence in the legal sense. It establishes negligence in just everyday talk, like you and I are talking. I failed to do something. That's negligent on my part. That is not legal negligence. In order to establish legal negligence, you have to have those 4 elements. It's very important to go through those 4 elements. So duty, first element is duty. There's no negligence if there's no duty. So that duty in the medical negligence sense is established when upon the formation of the physician-patient relationship. So then that's the rule. What are the facts in the case that support or that can be applied to that rule to help that analysis and support your conclusion? And then, so that's first element. Second element is a breach of that duty. So what's the rule? Well, it's the standard of care rule. How do you define standard of care? Well, that is sort of the reasonable standard that's in your textbook. That's the rule. Okay, so what facts demonstrate whether or not Dr. Ricketson met the standard of care? Well, there are numerous facts in the case. and things that he did and didn't do, um, to demonstrate whether or not he met that standard of care. Okay, so then you conclude whether or not he met the standard of care. The third element, causation. Okay, well, there's got something. His inaction had to have caused some sort of harm. So, what facts support that? And then finally, damages. There's no negligence if there are no damages. In the legal sense, he may have done things that were negligent, as you and I talk, but in terms of medical negligence, unless there's harm, there's no negligence in the legal sense. So, like I've said it, I've mentioned in some feedback on that milestone assignment that even the absence of one of those elements, as egregious as the facts may be, even the absence of one of those elements means, in the legal sense, there is no negligence. So it's very important to establish all four of those elements as you go through that. And then consider, as I try to get out of the sun here, then consider any legal issues that pertain to the hospital. So that's very important. As I mentioned before, this is kind of like my sophomore college physics class. You've got that IRAC method of legal analysis. Just utilize that. Issue, rule, apply the facts, and then turn the crank, come out with your conclusion. It's very, very methodical, so I would recommend following that. So again, if there are any questions, please let me know about that. Okay, I just want to touch briefly on clinical trials, and then we'll get into the ethics portion. Clinical trials is a step just one step of numerous steps involved in the drug development process. Super, super highly regulated by the FDA. And I've done investigations of clinical research companies in terms of compliance with applicable rules, both from the state level and from the federal level. Especially the FDA has issued so much guidance, so many rules, so many regulations, overseeing and governing this drug development process, and rightfully so. It's a very important process, and it's very time consuming. When you look at the news right now, what you're seeing is potentially 12 to 18 months to even come up with a vaccine for this COVID-19 virus that's going around, and there's a reason for that, because if you do not go through the scientific, methodical clinical research rules and guidelines, any sort of vaccine could end up doing more harm than good. So it's very important to go through that process. And one thing that I have just basically a common theme amongst my various investigations in these sort of trials is the importance of, and sometimes the lack of, true and proper informed consent by those participating in the clinical trials. Very important. From an FDA regulation standpoint, from an international sort of guideline rules, standard of care standpoint, proper informed consent means a lot. It's a lot more than just talking to a potential participant about the study itself. There's waiting times. There's allowing time to allow the potential participant to kind of review and ask questions. There are all kinds of requirements involved in what would be considered by the FDA as true informed consent. So that's a very important part. To me, the drug development process is super fascinating, and the FDA website is really helpful, actually, in helping understand everything that goes into that process and why it is such an expensive and time-consuming process. And I'm going to post a link in the announcement. Well, you've already seen it by now if you're watching this video, but I'm posting a link, and I would just encourage you. It's not required, but if you're curious, I would just go in and go to that link that I post on the FDA website to sort of just give a high-level overview of what that drug development process consists of. It's very interesting. Of course, there are serious ethical issues regarding clinical research, which is why, as I mentioned, full informed consent as the FDA defines it and requires it to be given is provided and documented. So very, very important. Okay, I want to get into the ethics part real quick as we not only our discussion questions, but the second milestone in the Ituraldi case is coming up. So I want to just talk about that. Not to get too deep into ethics, but I kind of break out ethics into two different components. There's societal ethics and there are individual ethics. So societal ethics, I view as something that, as a society, we have come together collectively and decided that certain actions, certain things are just unethical, and we've codified that into law. So, murdering people or stealing things, or just a variety of other embezzlement, all kinds of different things that we've codified into law in our criminal code, and in some respect our civil code, that we believe as a society are unethical, and we're not going to allow that in our society. So that, to me, that's collective ethics. And then there are individual ethics, and individual ethics may inform what we believe as a society, but everyone has different individual ethics. And there are obviously groups that share similar individual ethics, but they vary widely. These ethics are based on our personal belief. They're based on how we were raised, based on our faith, our religious values, what we've been taught, what we just basically what we believe, and how we've been informed, and how we choose to sort of live our lives and believe as an individual. These are things, as we think about it in the healthcare context, and some of our discussion questions, things like end of life issues like life support, abortion, even healthcare being an entitlement or a right or not. I mean, that could be, some people view that as an ethical issue. Rationing of healthcare, which sort of plays into that. And this kind of goes back to that first discussion or first assignment that we have with respect to the limited vaccines, and how are you going to distribute those vaccines through the lens of the different ethical theories that we were studying that week. So those are many people subscribe, for example, to the utilitarianism ethical theory, or the virtue-based or justice or duty-based. I mean, these are individual beliefs, and they're going to look at these different ethical issues through those lenses, and that's okay. That assignment became very real when we saw that, not necessarily with respect to vaccines with COVID-19, but with ventilators. We saw that in Italy. I think I posted that link or sent it out. That showed some of the decisions that healthcare providers in Italy had to make with respect to who was going to get treatment, who was going to get ventilators, because their healthcare system was so overwhelmed. And of course, the concept and the rules and the requirements related to social distancing here in the United States is predominantly based on avoiding overwhelming our healthcare system as much as we possibly can. Because when you overwhelm the healthcare system, those are the decisions that you end up having to make. And with the shortage of ventilators, with the shortage of healthcare workers that are equipped to, and a shortage of supplies, which has been very prominent in the news. When you have a shortage of those items, and you have an overwhelming amount of patients that are coming in with these symptoms that in some respects are life and death situations. On top of that, you've got normal sicknesses and normal emergencies outside of the COVID-19 situation that are also contributing to the overwhelming of the healthcare system. So that, obviously that's what we're trying to avoid, and why we're doing all this social distancing. But um, it's a very ominous situation when the Italian healthcare providers have to make those decisions, and we don't want to be in that situation. So there are ethics behind that, uh, or there's an ethical analysis at least behind that. Euthanasia is an interesting one that we're actually going to cover in this class in one of our discussion questions, and there are several states that have laws related to at least I think it started with Oregon. I know in Colorado it's called the Dignity, or was it Dying with Dignity, or I think it's Dying with Dignity Act, that allows very controlled, there are rules and requirements surrounding it, but allows some form of euthanasia under certain conditions, obviously terminal illnesses and things like that. These are all things to think about and consider as you think about your ethical values, and for our purposes, ethical values in the healthcare environment. So obviously, look, when you talk about individual ethics, I understand it can veer into the realm of a political discussion. I understand that ethical values can conflict, and I've only had to call out one person in the year and a half I've been teaching for Southern New Hampshire for not being respectful in a discussion board. But for the most part, it's not an issue. So I would just encourage you to understand that it's okay if people have different ethical beliefs. That's fine. We're here to discuss, and I fully expect. I would hate to have everyone have the same values and opinions that I have, because I'm glad that other people have different values and different opinions, because I enjoy discussing them, and I discussing those, and I learn from other people's values, and I learn from other people's beliefs, and hopefully people learn from my own beliefs and my values, and I think we grow together when we do that. So in order for that to happen, we need to be respectful of those beliefs. So again, we've talked about legal analysis. The ethical analysis is very similar. Obviously you don't have a rule, or a legal rule, but you do have an ethical theory. So you have facts, you have an ethical theory, apply the facts to that theory and come out with your conclusion. It's very similar. So that analysis should not look a lot different, even though we're discussing ethical issues as opposed to legal issues. Well, that's all I have this week. Hope you're all well. Hope you're all safe. Please let me know if you have any questions. If you need anything, I'm here and available. And just to make sure that we get value out of this course and we get through this together. So have a great week. Take care. Bye.